really wasn't planning on speaking or telling you any part of my story, but I think I should. I'm not an original native of Columbiana or even of Ohio. I'm from Pennsylvania, and yeah, I'm a Steelers fan. I'm sorry about that. I'm really sorry this year. But I met a girl in Alston, Massachusetts one day, and the moment I saw her, I knew I wanted to marry that girl. Now, I know that sounds so strange, you know, love at first sight, et cetera, but she lived in Columbiana, and so that's why I'm here, and we had 63 wonderful years together, and she passed away at the beginning of the COVID thing, but that's not the story I wanted to tell you. I'm a preacher's kid, and I grew up in the Nazarene church. Any former Nazarenes around here? No, I don't. And I was a little yeah, okay, Carla. And I went to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, every week, and then choir practice, and the board meetings, long-range planning committee meetings, et cetera, and I was having fun, really. And I was teaching a Sunday school class at the Nazarene Church here in town, and there were about 40 people or so in the class. It was one of those fun things. We had the coffee and donuts before that was acceptable in a church, and small groups and all that sort of thing. And one night I received a cell phone call that changed my life forever, my walk with God, totally. And it was a call from a lady in my Sunday school class, and she was disturbed, and she said, George, her husband, a good friend of mine, had gotten unhappy at home that night, and one of the kids had done something, and he stormed out of the house, and she was concerned that he would get down to Young's Tavern. Now, how many older people here remember Young's Tavern? We got another story. Young's Tavern was on South Main Street, and it was not a birdfish or a sundog. It was known as the hellhole center of Columbiana. When I received that call from Debbie that night, and I came home from work, and I put on my jeans. In those days we all wore white shirts and ties and so forth, but I put on my jeans and I went looking for George. I went to Young's Tavern, which is where he had usually habited, and he was not there that night. I found him elsewhere, but that night in prayer, and the next morning in prayer, I really felt like I should go back to the bar. Now you got to get this picture. Here's this lily white church person, had never been in a bar before, 52 years old, okay, and I went to the bar that first night and didn't find George, as I mentioned, but in prayer that night and the next morning I felt I should definitely go back to that bar and pay my friend's bar bill. Now he owed about $122, and he had been told he never could come back and so forth and so on. But as I walked in, I asked where the owner of the bar was, and they said that's her sitting on this bar stool playing cards with the bartender. And so I went and sat down alongside her, and her name was Nellie. And Nellie and I talked, and I said, I've got an expense check cash today. It's about $90, and would you take that for George's bar bill? And she was, number one, flabbergasted. Number two, really happy, because I don't think she ever expected to get a penny from George. But she took that, and we talked a little bit. I found out that she had gone to Sunday school somewhere as a young teenager, and she had a general kind of belief in prayer, and so we had that nice little chat, and I left, again, never expecting to go back, ever. But that night in prayer, and the next morning in prayer, I felt like I should go back to Young's Tavern, a third night in a row, pardon me, and this time to have a suggestion to Nellie. And so I went to the bar. She was sitting outside. It was a hot July evening in 1987. Okay, it goes back that far. 1987, And I said, Nellie, I've got something I'd like to talk to you about. And she said, well, let's go in and we can sit at one of the booths there. So I did. And we were sitting there chatting, and and a fight broke out right here, which is fairly normal at Young's Tavern at that time. And here's this lily white church person sitting there, and Nellie is calling out 482-9292, 482-9292. And I wondered, what in the world is she doing? And about that, I found out later that was the police chief's number. And but right there, just I could almost reach out and touch the participants, but the fight had broken out, and Nellie was calling the police to come down and break up the fight. And I heard the bartender saying, "It's okay, Mom, I got it. Bill, settle down." And I finally got up enough courage to take a quick look over, and she had this guy in a hammerlock, and he was not going anywhere. And she said, "Sit down," and Bill sat down, and nothing else happened except that the gentleman who had started the fight. It was just like out of a TV series, you know, with the short sleeve shirt and the cigarettes tucked in the shirt sleeve. Remember seeing those on TV? But the fight was over, and I continued talking to Nellie, and I said, would you ever consider me bringing a religious singing group down here sometime and put on a concert? And I think as much to her surprise as mine, she said, yeah. Okay, so I talked to some people at the church, and we started a prayer session, all that sort of thing. And so one Saturday night, 5 very scared but courageous people came and put on a concert. And we were there for almost 2 hours, and nobody left. Now, Young's Tavern wasn't very large, but I think we had about 50 people there that night, and no one left during that entire 2 hours. And and the kids sang kind of current gospel songs at that time, and the people at the bar were kind of disappointed because they assumed it would be a Western kind of thing, and which was their favorite. But nobody left, and Nellie would get my attention and point to somebody, and I'd go over and sit down alongside of them, and I swear within 90 seconds they were beginning to tell me about their life problems. And so she'd get my attention again and point to someone else, and so I spent 2 hours just rotating from table to table, talking to people about their issues. So that was a phenomenal night. And they said they wanted us to come back, just like the Uncle Brothers. Everybody who hears them wants them back again. And so I wasn't sure whether she meant that or not. And so I went back the next Wednesday night on my way to church. And as I walked into the bar, I was looking for some confirmation that they really meant what they had said, that they would like to have the group back. But as I walked in, Nellie recognized me, and she said, she came over, and I said, you know, I'm here before. Yeah, I know. She said, John, here's the guy I was telling you about. And now this is the bar owner. Okay. She said, John here has a drinking problem, and he needs to talk to some people from AA, and I figured you could help. Well, at that moment in my life, I knew nothing about AA, NA, CA, NCOA, or any of the other acronyms that describe people who help those who are addicted. But John and I talked and became acquainted. I liked him, and he seemed to like me, and that led into my going back there every Wednesday night for almost 7 months. And I kid you not, every Wednesday night there was someone either waiting for me to talk about their issues, or they came in through the night to talk to me about God. And it was a phenomenal thing. I just sat down at my end of the bar with a Diet Pepsi or a cup of coffee, and just we became the chaplains of the bar. And I'd get a call at midnight and saying, hey, so and so is beating up on his wife. Can you come down and talk to them? And do you know, when the runaways come into town, they don't go to churches. When young runaways come into town, they go to a bar. And I'll never forget the night that this young gal came in from Maryland, and the bar people called me, and I went down and talked to her, and long story short, we were able to reconnect her with her parents in Maryland that she thought would never love her again, and so forth. So 7 months. We started a God study on Sunday night. Remember, we began to talk about that, and the bartender said, "Well, what the hell? We'll open this place. We'll have a God study here." And so we did that on Sunday nights. Halfway through there, I found out why I was there. And it shook me so badly that I think I cried all the way home that night. Nellie, this what seemed to be a hardened 62-year-old lady who would never pray. You know, the last person in Columbiana you would think would be praying, it was Nellie. As we had this God study, it gradually came out that she had been praying for 4 years for God to send someone to her to show her what her daughter had found. Her daughter had become a Christian out of, I think, the Assembly of God Church. It was Assembly of God Church on Route 7. And Nellie had been praying for 4 years that God would send somebody to her to tell her how to come to God. And when I realized that that had been a privilege that was given to me, I couldn't handle it, because I thought I was going there, and I was the one who was initiating things. It wasn't me at all. It was God. And the only guidance that God gave me then was to just love them. Don't tell them to go to church. Don't tell them any of that kind of stuff. Just plain love them. And that's what I did. Through that time, 8 or 10 of them came to God, became Christ followers, and their lives were changed. But my life was changed more. You know, I still go to church once a week, and I love the church. But what I found was there were needs in the church, and no question about that. But when I got outside the church, it's kind of like God picked me up out of the sanctuary and threw me into that bar. And where I had lived in Columbiana for 25 years, had raised all 5 of our kids here in Columbiana. And all that time, my world was traveling in nice circles of business, Mount Vernon Nazarene University, churches and so forth. And all the time, there was this other world underneath in our little Columbiana. And those two worlds never intersected until I went to the bar that night. And I met people who became lifelong friends. And some of them who are still alive are lifelong friends. I do have to tell you that one thing that shook me up was I realized a couple of years later that within 2 years, all but 2 of those people were dead and gone. And I think about, boy, responding to God asking you to do something, my tendency would be to put it off, evaluate it and all that sort of stuff. But when we feel that God is leading us to do something, the sooner we can do it, the better for us and for them. So, now you know how the way station began. Because at the end of that time, neither Pat nor I or the other people who were involved could go back to the comfortable life that we had before. There were so many needs in this town. I mean, the drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff, yeah, but there was poverty. But there were people who just emotionally were a wreck. And so we said, what are we going to do? And so 3 families got together and bought the little building by the railroad track on East Park Avenue, and it's the Anglican church now, and opened it up. And the first night December 3rd, 1988 was when it first opened up, and we were inundated with teenagers. And then the rest of the story is history. But now God has connected me with, since my wife's passing, with various groups of people. And I'm having a ball. I really am. These guys know about one group that that I happen to be a part of, but God changed my walk with Him in such a dramatic way that I will be forever grateful for that change because of what has led into. So that's the piece of my story. Thank you.